Okay. So I'm Nick Beveridge. Just a little bit about me. I've got about 10 years of experience now as a broker and investor. I actually started investing in 2008, but that didn't go well. I actually lost my first home, learned a lot from it. And then I really started up again in like 2014. Currently right now I've got about 20 active projects, and they're a mix between builds, flips, burrs. Got over a dozen rental properties right now, and our sales team does over 100 transactions a year. So I'm pretty involved in the real estate industry, and I try to pretend like I know what I'm talking about, but I think I am at this point. And I've spent thousands of hours, and that's probably a low figure, on seminars and training over the last couple of decades. Because I probably spent 500 hours in seminars before I ever bought a house. I was an obsessed, weird little kid.
Did you go to like Google places or?
Oh yeah, I did the Rich Dad courses. I got in a huge credit card debt, and it was fun. I enjoyed it. What I want to talk to you about first, though, before we just jump right into real estate in general, is like talking about money and why real estate might be a good idea to get into. I want you to kind of change your thinking, if you're not there yet, like about how money is valued, and try to eventually align your interests with like the forces that dictate policy, monetary policy, and then really try to understand inflation and how that, with most people, inflation, it hurts them, right? 90% of the people out there. But you can use it to your advantage to help grow your net worth, and we'll talk about that. This is a saying from Ronald Reagan. To say the government spends like a drunken sailor is an insult to drunken sailors. The reason why he said that was because the government just creates money out of thin air and they don't work for it. But if you can align your interests with the two most powerful forces in the world, and that being governments and central banks, who thinks I'm wrong about that? Any takers?
Maybe
yes.
Insurance companies.
Insurance companies? Yeah, you're probably right.
Almighty.
Have you guys ever seen this website?
Yep.
Have you seen it recently? Yeah? You're always on it. Did I hear someone say I'm always on there? I thought I heard that. Okay. So yeah, we're up to 28 trillion now, almost 29. Have you ever looked down here at the unfunded liabilities that we're at? 158 trillion almost. Do you know how much money that is? Just print more. You're ahead of us. Well, what do they pretend they're doing? Well, really, so governments, they have a plan. Don't worry, they're not that, ignorant of what's going on. And they have a plan. They know how to deal with it, and it's really not fair to most people. There's 6 ways they can get out of this mess. They can just default on debts, right? Then go bankrupt. Who thinks that's a good idea for a politician to do? You think they're going to willingly just fail in front of everybody or print more money? So they're probably not going to do that. It's unpopular. Really what they want is they want more votes. They want to be reelected. They like the job. They could just raise taxes. You think that'll solve the problem?
That's the problem. Can't raise them right now.
If you look back at that clock, everyone would have to pay almost $500,000 to get caught up right now. Every person in the United States. Almost $500,000 to fund unfunded liabilities coming up and all that stuff. They couldn't raise taxes enough. They can have a yard sale and sell assets, right? You think that's a good idea?
Sell California to China.
Yeah, they can sell our shipping docks. They can do that. They can, Bureau of Land Management, they have done things like this, but it's unpopular, right? It's maybe not safe to sell off our ports to Dubai. There was talks about that a decade ago. That didn't go well. They can always steal from other countries. It's a real, it's been a pretty popular move. the last few centuries or longer or forever, right? They could always do that. I think we're doing it anyway, but it's probably not enough. Or that, they can produce or innovate some earth-changing products. They can be the leader of space travel or invent some cure for cancer that helps the world. Who knows? That could be done, right? To help kind of get us out of this mess. But the most likely scenario that the government's going to keep doing to deal with these problems is they're just going to continue to inflate the currency, right? Because what they're doing is that they're paying debt back in cheaper dollars. Has anyone ever seen this? You seen it to 2020? So if you were to go back in 1913 and you held up a dollar, whatever that dollar can buy back then, today that same dollar could buy about 3 cents worth. It's lost that much purchasing power. So you got to try to understand inflation, and we need to know the difference between price and value. Inflation is the hidden tax that destroys purchasing power. It destroys savings, stocks, bonds, equity, and what else do you think it destroys? Huh?
Debt?
Yeah, perfect. It destroys the value of debt. Does everyone understand that? Do you know why? It could be a good thing to load up on debt because you're paying it back, you're locked in, you're paying it back in cheaper dollars over time. So just think about this. Even if it takes 2-3 years or so, if the government can get 10% inflation, that's a discount of almost $2.8 trillion of a discount on the debt that they currently have. Does that seem like a good idea? If we just get that up to 10%, that's a lot of money. Anyone confused yet? It's okay if you're confused. Everyone's on board.
When
Cool.
we get to basic, it's pretty high-end economics.
Well,
It's important, but
I'm getting there. I'm trying to make you think of where do you think we're going, truthfully, with the U.S. dollar and the strength? I don't think it's going away. I mean, the U.S. has a lot of military power around the world. I don't think oil's going away. I drive a Tesla, but I don't think oil's going away right away. And you have to have U.S. dollars to purchase oil around the world. It's a strong currency, but... Okay, so I'm going to give you an example. Any questions so far about this? Seems like everybody's like, yeah, I know all this. It's okay. So here's a real world example that actually happened to the average person that bought a house in 1972. So just imagine, it's 1972 and Nixon just took us off the gold standard. And he temporarily took us off the gold standard as well. Remember that? He's going to temporarily take us off. And it was 50 years ago as of a couple months ago. Imagine it's 1972 and you just purchased a house, which the average price point was about $18,267. And let's say you got a loan of 80%, and that's $14,640 or $14 for the loan. You got a 30-year fixed rate at 7.37. Who thinks that's a high rate? Yeah.
By today's standards.
It's high. So the payment on that would be $101. A little shy of 101, but 101. 14 years later, we upgraded our car, got the same house. We got a 1984 Plymouth Voyager. A lot of inflation happened, didn't it? Took us off the gold standard, and during the 70s and 80s, prices increased. More dollars went into circulation. But that payment stayed the same. If you were to look at a chart and look at the inflation rates that $101, 16 years later, it felt like 40 bucks. Does that make sense? So for that person, back in 1972, might have seemed like a lot, 100 bucks. But as time goes on, as more money comes into the country, or circulation, as jobs, wages increase like a little bit, it starts to become a little bit easier. It's okay, I'll wait, Jeff. Okay, now we're getting towards the end of the loan. It's 2001, and we've upgraded to a Chrysler Sebring. The loan's paid off. Now we paid a lot of interest, right? Paid a total pay-in for the house, $36,314. Remember the house is for $18,000, but they've been making that $100 payment for 30 years. That's how much they actually paid. But if you adjust for inflation, the actual effective rate, if you were to play that in, was closer to 1%. Remember it was 7%? If you never refinance, if you just stayed at that, you're really paying actually about 1%. And there's more. You also have a tax savings on your mortgage interest. So if you figured in the average mortgage savings rate for the tax deduction that you got to pay on the interest, you actually at negative 1.16. So that means that person actually got paid to take that loan. And this is not even an investment house. This is just someone living there. No rent coming in. Who's lost yet? Okay. So we'll get into real basic stuff again. So this is the investing part. We'll get into rentals and flips.
You mind if I ask a question before we move into this?
Yes.
So if the inflation rate is higher than the interest rate that you're paying already, how is that sustainable? If the rate of inflation right now is 5.5%,
Yeah.
and let's just say you're at 3% on a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, the bonds aren't paying out what the value of the dollar is losing. So the pace of the loss is outpacing what the investor is getting paid. So how does that even sustain? Like, is that's back then the rate of inflation when
Yep.
you took out the loan at 7% was higher. The interest rate was higher than the rate of inflation until Nixon took us off the gold standard.
Right.
So it flipped after the debt was accumulated.
Yep.
Right now, you're taking out debt currently lower than what the rate of inflation is. So how is that model sustainable for macroeconomics?
You want to answer that?
For the investors.
So you have from a banking industry, and you may be a better one to talk about this, but banks are able to lend out much more than they actually have in assets. They're not actually lending their own money, so they're lending multiples of their own money. So as an example, so you might be below a 3% interest. A bank might actually only have a third of that money in actual assets, cash, and they're lending many times short-term federal money. So it's the government that's supporting the whole system, and they're keeping the spread on that. So the spread's pretty small, but they're still keeping the spread off of short-term federal money that they're bringing in, and then they just keep cycling that over and over and over again based upon the deposits that come into the bank.
The end user,
So they're paying you 1/10% on the money you have invested with them, they're charging you 3% when you borrow it.
You understand the spread?
Mhm.
If you do that math, they're making boatloads of cash. I mean, you ever look at a bank? Now, where'd they get that money from? They have pretty nice buildings. They're not bad.
But then to your example, I put $1,000 in the bank, they pay me 1/10, but they loan 3 people $1,000, right, at
More than
3%.
Yeah.
Right,
More
so,
so.
and more than that, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think most people keep their loan for 30 years?
The average is 5.6 years.
The average is 5.6 years. Most people are not holding that loan longer than that. So it's also an odds game that the banks are playing. But yeah, you're right. It doesn't matter. Like the bank's making their fees. without their own money. They're just making, it's more like a commission.
Plus, they also make their
And
money,
the Fed's printing it.
they also make their money on what are called service release premiums, when they transfer that loan to another lender or another investor, and then that gets transferred to another investor. They're always making their money back, so that they're not on the hook for 30 years at 3%. So that's another way they make money.
So like a bank loan, sorry,
It's okay.
a bank loan seems like it's pretty cheap money, which it is in many times. But the banks don't actually have to have that money on hand in order to lend it. Somebody like a hard money lender, I don't have the benefit of lending your money to somebody else all the time. I mean, I do, because I keep a spread based upon the equity I have in property. So I borrow money at a low rate and I lend it out at a high rate, which is exactly what the banks are doing. But overall, when you're talking about private money, the private money investor that's lending the money, they actually have to have that money. I mean, that's their money. They have to have that money in an account to send it to you. So it's, and that's why private money is so much more expensive, because it's not being subsidized by the federal government.
One thing, I'll go back real quick and point out. I didn't talk about this at all. But picture, you bought your house, 1972, and you've paid in that total. What do you think it's worth?
Right now?
2001. Think it's worth more than 36 grand? 2001?
150.
So we didn't even talk about that. This is just simply, how's your money doing? Okay. Yeah, so we'll talk about rentals, which is, building net worth and your cash flow, and then flips, which is just, I think it's completely different. You're running a business, you're making short-term money. Okay, so with rentals, I don't know if I can go much further. You got a couple different, in my opinion, tactics to go down. You could be a traditional investor, and this is where you're investing your own cash, a large amount of it, to grow your net worth over time. Or you can be a creative investor, and that's where you're investing a lot of your time, not necessarily your cash. You're spending your time finding deals, solving problems, to create your net worth over time. You know the difference? I've got a couple examples. This is a property that's on the MLS right now that I pulled today. It's in Post Falls. It's only 10 years old. 3-bedroom, 2 baths, 1,666 square feet. It's listed for $400 grand, $399,900, and it should rent for $2,000 a month. Anybody think any more or less?
Sounds about right.
Sounds about right? Yeah. It's going to give you a long-term, great 30-year fixed loan. And it's typically going to be around 0.5% to 1% more than what an owner-occupied loan would be, right? And you might have another, like a point in fees or so higher. So they're still great loans, but they're not. When you're thinking you're going to get a traditional loan, don't go to Quicken Loans or whatever and look for the best rate, because you're not going to get it. Am I wrong? Okay. Okay, so let's run the numbers on what this actually looks like. I already ran the numbers for you. I'll click on the link. So with a house like that, you'd have to, pretty simple math, it's 400 grand, 25% is, need 100 grand of your own cash. You probably need around $5,000 in closing costs or so for the loan fees and appraisals and stuff. If you get a loan like this today, what do you think, 4%?
Depends on credit.
Depends on credit.
Your
Loan to value.
mid-threes.
So on a house like that, your monthly principal and interest payment is $1,446. That doesn't include taxes and insurance. It varies from city to city, county to county. When you're buying rentals, it's a real good idea to pay attention to that. You could be spending more per month on a Post Falls house than a Hayden house by far sometimes, just because the taxes are almost like half in Hayden what they are. in Post Falls. So it's important to look at because you're looking at cash flow. So with taxes and insurance figured in, your monthly expenses, and what I've calculated for monthly expenses on this one, since this house is only 10 years old, I didn't go too heavy. Is it in here? Okay. Please argue with me if you think I'm off on some of this. I put vacancy at about 3%. I was figuring a year on a house like this, it might be vacant. CapEx, I put at about 2% annually, $40 a month. Repairs, another 2%. Management, 8%. Does that all sound okay so far? Any questions about those expenses?
Yeah, if you had to turn it once in a year, you'd blow that out of the water.
If you have to turn it once in a year, you might blow it out of the water. Depends on how the rental's set up too.
Yeah.
If you have luxury vinyl planking, no carpet, if you already have like cleaning fees built into your leases and all this stuff, your turn costs could be pretty low too. And if you're showing the property before the tenants move out to minimize vacancy, there are ways that you can keep the vacancy pretty low on a house like this in Post Falls. They're in demand. You want to buy in-demand products. But you're right, it could be pretty low. But overall, your monthly cash flow on an investment like this is going to be about $253 a month. And you're going to have about $100,000 in equity. Why? Because you paid for it. You put it down. It's not like that disappeared. It just went into the asset. If you were to look at a 30-year projection, going off pretty average rates of inflation, if you sell this thing in 30 years, you could make a profit of a little over $1 million. Over time, your property value increases little by little until it becomes, up to almost $1 million. Your annual cash flow starts to grow and grow as rents increase over the years. But guess what doesn't increase? The mortgage payment. You're locked in. So I think it's important to look at some of this if you're considering investing $100,000 into a house, and maybe compare that with a treasury bond, or or if you're going to buy Facebook on the stock market or something like that.
Can I add one more thing to that, Nick? I don't want to be
Yeah.
having your presentation.
No, go ahead.
If you invest $100,000 in the market, non-real estate, stocks, bonds, whatever, and you get a 10% return, you're going to earn $10,000, 10% on $100,000. $100,000 on a $400,000 home, you get a 10% return on that. You're getting a $40,000 return, not a $10,000 return. So your return is on the value of what you bought,
Yeah.
not just on the dollars that you put in.
Yeah, the bank doesn't take their cut.
Yeah, exactly.
They're done.
And depending upon how much growth it is, and if it's depending on the other expensive stuff, you can really minimize your tax on that, where you're paying full tax on anything that you're on any growth you have on any other investment, stocks, bonds, whatever.
This doesn't have any of that figured in. So all the tax benefits that you get with that, you're still paying. You have a mortgage, you still get to write off that. You have a property manager, you still get to write off that. There's all these extra little write-offs that will help you if you have another, like a high income job, that will help minimize those taxes that you might be obligated to. Not a CPA, I can't tell you for sure, but it's a pretty good chance that the government incentivizes you to provide housing for people, and that's the best way they can do it, is by giving you a huge tax break on almost everything.
And it's beyond the housing part, I'm sorry, but when a house is sold, a lot of people make money on it. You make money, I make money, the appraiser makes money, the
Inspector,
makes money,
the broker.
I mean, everybody makes money, so that's taxable income that they're making, right? So now they're making money, so now they're paying income tax on that. And then when you buy a property, you put money into it, whether it's your primary or investment property. So now Home Depot's making money, or all your other supply. So it's a huge stimulant in the economy.
Yep.
So it's not just that you provide housing, but because you're creating income for all the other people that touch it, that's why you get such tax incentives.
Yeah. It's about aligning your interests with the forces that dictate policy. What they really don't want you to do is what most people do, is just sit there and work for a living and leech off somebody's company. You're penalized by paying the highest taxes because you're not contributing as much to the community and to the economy. Sounds brutal, but that's just the way the tax code is written. Okay. I'm going to get into an example of creative investing. So that last one, you need a lot of cash, right? When I first started, I didn't have much cash. I still don't have much cash. It's amazing how much cash you can burn through when you're investing in properties. Right, Rob? You're laughing pretty hard. Okay, so this is the idea of finding a discounted property of around 30% or more. And typically these properties have problems, right? It's pretty hard to find this property at 30% off. Good luck, I've only done it once in the last 10 years. So you gotta kind of look out for these problems. They're pretty much the only way you can get ahead in the creative investing world. So some examples, fixer-uppers, problems with tenants, estate, probate houses, stubborn, I hate realtor sellers. Sometimes they'll sell at discounts, foreclosures, tax sales, REO, short sales. You don't see as many short sales anymore, but you probably will. An REO is real estate owned. It's a bank-owned asset. They've foreclosed and then they've actually taken it back in their inventory and then they hire an agent to sell it. There's like maybe one REO on the whole market, or there's none. We can look, but there's not many. So I'll give you an example of this creative investing. This is my most recent rental property that I just put on the market. I've owned it for a year now, because that's how long these projects take sometimes. And my initial estimates when I looked at this, I thought, hey, it's a large house in Hayden. It could be worth $450,000 after it's fixed up. It's 3,000 square feet. It might need $50,000 in improvements. So that's the numbers I based that off of. Here's a look at what it looked like. When you pull in, you can barely fit through the driveway because they had a bunch of junk out there. They took the garage and put the door on its side and put a little man door here so that they can rent out this side of the garage and the basement and the upstairs. It was a perfect house for me. But nobody was paying rent in this house. Let's look in the garage. This gentleman here that sold it to, I was the end buyer. I bought it from a wholesaler out of Boise. That wholesaler out of Boise was dealing with this guy, and I was dealing with the other guy. He had just built all these beautiful shops back here that I had to take down. They weren't built to code. And no permits, no setbacks. They forgot the setback rules. You can crush your head right when you walk into this metal. Unfortunately, it was a lot of wasted money on lumber and metal. This backyard, there was somebody else, there was a fourth person living in this RV in the backyard. There's also an area that you can live in above this little storage shed with a blanket. They forgot to put doors on this shop.
So they were basically Airbnb masters then.
So what happened was the guy with the hat, he got a roommate. And this roommate came in and took over the house, didn't pay him anything, and started renting everything around him.
Oh my gosh.
This guy got frustrated and walked away.
Wow.
And he sold it at a huge discount. Yeah, sucks. Be careful who you let move into your house. And then it took me months to get him out too.
How long did it take to get everybody out? Mind to work on it.
I'll get into that. But there was a reason why he sold it, you know. Yeah.
The contractor's
It was a piece. You're like, why'd you take down the shop, man? That's why. Look at that. I usually just take, so this is in the garage.
Wow.
Bathtub in the garage, everyone. With the strobe lights. They had a bathroom in the garage, which I kept. They had this little bedroom in the garage, which we kept. There's the upstairs kitchen. Flooring was kind of messed up. Overall, the house was it was in decent shape. Just cosmetically, it was kind of a nightmare. Yeah, master bath with the blue tub and the old school tile. Tons of gap in the floor, all these gaps in the flooring. So, and all kinds of different laminate in every bedroom. The fridge didn't work. Another kitchen downstairs with more people living down there. And they really like spray foam. They spray foamed every crack they can find in the basement. We ended up opening this wall in the basement. Here's another silly thing. I thought there were 2 water heaters supplying water to the house, hot water. I didn't find out till like the very end of the renovation. Oh, that one's just back there because they didn't take it out.
It's like an over roof.
So make sure you check to see if it's connected and not just make assumptions. I make mistakes all the time, but what I don't make a mistake on is just buying right. But I make plenty of mistakes. Oh, here's a look at that renter guy right there. I had to evict him. It's just his hands. He had eviction-y hands, didn't he?
What was the house being rented for?
It was for free.
Oh,
Yeah.
They were free to the owner, but the guy with the hands, he was doing great.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he was making money. The guy with the eviction-y hands.
that's a big house.
Yeah, it's a large house. It's 3,000 square feet plus the extra bonus garage space area. There's probably a lot more photos here than you need to see, but okay, I'll stop. It's an endless amount of photos. Here's a look at the closing statement. And since I got a great deal, okay. Oh, and don't be afraid to walk away. I had the option to buy this house at $285, and I considered it, and I walked away. I said, I'm sorry, I can't make the numbers work. Eventually, weeks later, the wholesaler got back to me. He said, I can get it at $265. And I looked at my numbers again. I'm like, it's close, but I think I'd really have to be at $250. But if you need help, if you want me to push out to my list, just let me know. Then call back a week later. The guy really wants to get out of this thing. He'll do $250, but I need $5,000 as an assignment fee. I'm like, okay, let's do it. And at that time, I had a lot going on. I didn't know what I was going to do with the property. I didn't have a plan for it. I didn't know if I was going to flip it or rent it. I didn't even have a renovation budget, but I just said, let's do it. Because it's a house in Hayden with 3,000 square feet for $250, and the ARV was $450. It appraised for $575 after I was done with it.
I see multiple addresses up there at the top. Did you,
So what I did was I used some creative ways to get the loan. I took a rental property. This is multifamily on Homestead. I took that because I had equity in it, and I used that with my hard money lender as cross collateral. So I got, when I came to closing, instead of coming to closing with money, they gave me $1,600. And I didn't have a renovation budget or anything. I also got an interest reserve that lasted about 6 months. I think it lasted till May or so. So I had $13,300. So I had another few months too to figure out what I was going to do with this with no payments. So I got $1,600, no payments, because the hard money lender also realized, great deal. I could do that loan. If for some reason I mess up, he takes the property back, he's going to be okay. Any questions about that? It's all about buying right. And then you can do things like this. It is expensive. I think I spent close to 30 grand in fees in the last year. But I think I've got 200 grand in equity now on this property. I had other people working on it, not me. Oh, here's that surprise eviction stuff. In case you're wondering what it costs to evict somebody. That's not bad, but guess how much it really cost me?
How long
How
did
many,
it
how
take?
many months of no rent?
Yeah,
Yeah, you thought-
Add that to
4 months times $2,600.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're holding.
That's a lot. But guess what we did?
10 grand.
What's that? What?
10 grand, ish.
But I've been burned before. This has happened once or twice. So I said, hey, I'm not going to close unless there's some sort of holdback from that seller to make sure that, because the guy had an agreement to be out, and the seller actually paid him $2 grand, and he paid the guy in the basement $2 grand to be out on a certain date, 2 weeks after we closed. But the seller also put up 10 grand and left with escrow to make sure that these tenants are moving out. So this $10,000 was held hostage between myself and the seller. Does that make sense?
Were you only able to pay your realtor fee, or your attorney fees with that? Or did you cover your lost rents?
No, I almost had $10,000 exactly in lost opportunity and interest, attorney fees. I paid my property manager to go out there several times to try to figure out the situation. Because the guy just didn't leave. He took money, he didn't leave. And it was during COVID. He thought he had certain rights. Coeur d'Alene County Sheriff Department said, yeah, you got to run it through the courts. The judge said, we don't care what's going on nationwide, get out of the house. So that's kind of cool. We live in a pretty cool area where people use common sense and they don't do
You're saying you got to keep that 10,000 then?
No. So the seller just went missing. Couldn't get a hold of him for a while. Eventually he answered his phone. I told him what was going on. And I offered him, hey, if you could just come and sign the release, I'll give you $1,000, give me $9,000. And he talked to me about how I'm getting rich off this and yada, yada, yada. And I'm like, yeah, sorry. I'm dealing with your problem, but this was why we had this in place. Just for this reason. I've already lost like 10 grand. What do you think is fair, is what I asked him. And he said, $2,500 is what I want. I'm like, okay. So he went to the title company, got $2,500, I got $7,500, and I was fine with that.
Did you only put that in place because you knew it was going to be a pain in the ass to get those people out, or do you usually do stuff like that?
I do now.
Okay.
I didn't used to, and I used to just eat it.
So it's happened to you multiple times then?
A couple.
Okay.
Yeah. I try not to buy properties that have tenants in them, but usually I almost everything I buy is problems or land. So
You need a couple of Bennies and Guidos in this group to.
they don't work. I've tried.
Yeah.
Yeah. They call the police.
Is there anything you would have done differently?
Um,
Help yourself?
Yeah, I would have just sent it to the attorney immediately. I tried to work with the guy because he kept saying he was going to move out. He's got an apartment. He's going to move out this date. Come back, drove by. It's not there. Had the sheriff go out there, and the sheriff's like, "Yeah, this guy's a piece of shit, but I think he's really moving out on this date. They seem like they really are. And they never did. And it just went week after week and month after month. And then eventually I'm just like, okay, got to send it to the attorney. And then they had to do a formal thing where it took almost a couple of months. Even though technically it's like 23 days is what they advertise in Idaho, but it takes a little bit of time to do it just right.
So just go ahead and jump on that right away. You have to just get that process going, like you said.
Yeah, it was $900.
Yeah.
Might as well. That was my cheapest bill.
And if you know it's gonna take,
And that's a problem solver.
if you know it's gonna take a month and a half, send it to the attorney, and if they move out before, then it'd be great.
Yeah, they won't charge you the whole thing. Yeah.
What
Okay.
attorney did you use?
What's that?
What attorney do you use?
Them. Radel and Riedel. Okay. So a year goes by. And here's what the property looks like now. We got new garage doors, painted the exterior, got a new front door. We replaced a couple of windows. I always have this plan initially to do just a little bit of work. And then I do way more. I have a spending problem. But in my head, I'm always just like, if we just do a little bit nicer, it'll price for more, or it'll sell for more. And then I just keep going down this rabbit hole. And you just never know when to stop sometimes. But it's a good idea to have a budget and stick with it. I have yet to do that.
It has a nice street appeal now.
Yeah, so the shops are gone in the backyard. That yard was way too expensive. It doesn't even have sprinklers, and it cost me like... it was also done during the year where contractors were very unavailable, and it's 3 times more expensive than they ever used to be. So that was pretty frustrating. I thought initially this house would cost $50,000 to do everything. It cost $100,000, 110 or so. So with fees and all that stuff,
Recognize it.
I'm into this house, I think $366,000 or so. All the bedrooms are very large. We got all tile all over the place. The garage I kept the same, but we just painted the interior. It's just kind of like a bone. Yeah, no tub here. There used to be the tub. Big old living room. We put in a wet bar where the kitchen used to be, kind of like in this little closet area, just to have some cool entertainment, just take advantage of the plumbing that was already there. That wet bar wasn't too expensive to put in because the plumbing's already there. And I think it's a nice little feature.
How come you didn't do it as an ADU?
I didn't want to go through that pain again because I've done, not an ADU, but I don't want tenants sharing walls. I have like a fourplex, you know what I have. That it generates a lot of cash flow, but it's also, management heavy. And I'm choosing to just go less shared walls and more single family. And after I did all the math, if I were to chop this up and rent out the garage and the basement and the upstairs, I would probably get a little bit more cash flow, but I don't think it'd be worth as much, and it'd be much harder to sell in the long run. It would have been really hard to refinance because you can only do an ADU. It's not permitted for a duplex with an ADU or a triplex. With a triplex with 3 units, you need to have like a separate water line coming from the street and like a sprinkler system through the house. So it gets pretty complicated. If your plan is to keep the property and refinance it, you better make sure that it meets code, because the bank only wants to make financing on things that meet code typically.
A low risk.
And I was planning on flipping this house initially. Right when I got those tenants out, my plan was I was going to fix it up and sell it and make about $100,000. During the renovation, I had my property manager walk through just to be sure and kind of see what it might rent for. And he told me that it should go at that time between $3,000 and $4,000 a month.
Wow.
So my decision was to keep it as a rental because I would have taken that flip money and tried to go buy a rental with it anyway. So why not cut out some time and just keep this one? That was that sauna room that was blocked off. It just turned into a little storage area. Anyway, so it's not rented yet. It just got thrown on the rental market about a week ago or so. We tried at $3,175 and then we just lowered it to $2,900. My property manager is pretty confident it should go for $2,900 because it's like a 6-bedroom, 4-bath house in Hayden. The neighborhood's just not amazing. But assuming that it rents for $2,900, this is what the numbers look like long term. I invested a lot of my cash into it initially. I did get another hard money loan on top of this. I went back to my lenders and I said, hey, can I have 40 grand? I'm doing a bunch of work here. And they said, sure. They looked at the values and they wired me another 40 grand. I ended up spending 100, so I've got 60,000 technically into this plus some extra mortgage payments. But I'm refinancing it right now and it appraised for $575,000 and I get to have a loan for $402,500 because that's 70% of what it appraised at.
What?
That the difference between, okay, so it appraised at $575,000. Typically, when you're doing a cash out refi of a single family rental, you can typically get 70 to 75% of whatever the appraisal value is. My lender said you can have 70%. That's it. They're kind of capping me out all the time. But with that 70%, with paying off the loan that I have, the hard money loan, I'm still going to get like 70 grand back. So I'm going to get a $10,000 bonus, basically. I'm going to get all my cash back that I have into it plus another 10 grand. And that money that's coming back to me is tax-free because it's debt. So it's unlike a flip where if I flip this house and I made the 100 grand, that would have been taxable at 30%-ish, 35, depending on how I did my taxes that year. In this scenario, I get to keep the house, get to keep the 25 grand a year in cash flow, and the equity that I can utilize for other flips.
What's your mortgage payment with your refinance?
It is, I think, $2,200 or so. I don't know if it's in, it should be in here. Monthly mortgage payments. It's just, I think the taxes and insurance is separate.
2019.
Yeah, so that's my monthly interest and principal payments. And then the taxes and the taxes and insurance are separate on this sheet. But they've got the cash flow figured out correctly. So monthly.
Do you normally go through this company, Bigger Pockets? You mentioned that before.
I like to check out the Bigger Pockets calculator to look at what's my 30-year, if I were to keep this for 30 years, what could it potentially look like in my retirement? So with me getting my money back, plus an extra 10 grand, Bigger Pockets thinks that I'm also going to get an extra $1.6 million added to my retirement in 30 years. Now, how long do you think it would take you to save up $1.6 million?
Just working a 9 to 5?
Yeah, Best Buy or something.
Yeah. Your whole life. Your whole life.
Just don't spend anything.
Just no, really. Can you imagine yourself saving up that much money for retirement?
That one investment is more than most people will ever save.
Yeah. Can you imagine yourself getting into $1.6 million in debt and having someone else pay it off over time? Is that a little bit more reasonable? Because eventually that debt just becomes yours. Any questions? What was the cash
The
flow?
house looks amazing. before you changed it.
Well, you can thank Jeff. And Sam. Sam started it off. Okay. Purchase closing cost. Yeah, okay. Move on. Pretty basic stuff, right? Okay, so highly recommend you buy at a discount. I highly recommend that you make sure that it cash flows at least $200 a door. And that's after all expenses and figuring in your CapEx and repairs. I really recommend you hire a good property manager. I personally don't like to talk to my own tenants or know them, or I don't want them to know me, because I want this to scale over time. I want hundreds of houses, and I don't want to know thousands of tenants. I don't want to know any of them. And also, a good property manager, they can typically get more than what you could anyway. So it's almost like having somebody that's free working for you, because they can typically get 6 to 8% more than what you could, and they're a tax write-off. So why wouldn't you just hire somebody to do the job? And I'm now starting to plan on making annual improvements. So I try to pick properties that need something and actually schedule it for, like, okay, in the spring we're going to paint this house. Otherwise, you're just going to eventually have a bunch of stuff just erode, and nothing's ever, over time, you're just going to have a bunch of crap. So make sure that you're planning on making improvements over time and saving for it. And use the equity. That's a huge thing with these properties. Almost always when you get into a rental property, you kind of have to have equity. Either you build it yourself or you buy it, but you can use it as cross collateral. Have you ever done this before with loans?
Not in a second. We might,
Okay.
Rarely we'll do a second, but if it's free and clear, yeah, it's a huge asset for our money.
Yeah. And you can, I'm doing a refi right now that's paying off another house. So I'll have one house in Kellogg that's worth a couple $100,000, and it will be paid off, and I can, even though it's still going to be bringing in rental income, I could choose to just sell it and get the money, but I can still use it as collateral to work on other projects.
Right.
So you don't have to get rid of your rental properties to still have them help you make money on other deals.
It's like having a, 200 in the bank, essentially.
It's like having 200 in the bank, but it's paying you better than the bond market or whatever. So I had to kind of switch. So with creative investing, I got to skip through some of this stuff. Just know that your network is your net worth. The more people you surround yourself with, the more possibilities you're going to have. If you keep coming back to these things, you're eventually going to do a deal. Right, Stephen?
Right.
Yeah. I remember when I first started this back in 2015, the majority of the room were all rookies and they'd never done anything before. The ones that just kept coming back and coming back and coming back, eventually they just started doing deals because you're surrounded by other investors and other people that can help you, contractors, lenders, real estate agents, the works. So just know that your network is your net worth, and you can just show up to this and it's pretty helpful. And then there's plenty of other groups. Kelly, you got one going. You guys, first Wednesday in Moscow, second Thursday in Sandpoint. So they're all over the place now. Okay. So when I say you need to get a really good deal, does anybody not understand the 70% rule? A little bit? So when we say 70% rule, there are two things that you need to figure out. What's the ARV, and that's after repair value. So after repair value, you take whatever that after repair value is, and we're going to use real simple. We're going to pretend that this house right here, when it's fixed up, it could be worth $100,000. And you don't want to buy a house typically, if you're a creative investor, unless you can get it for 70% of that after repair value. So that would be $70,000. And then what you got to do is you got to subtract your repair cost. This is the simple formula I almost always use on flips or rentals. It just seems to work because if I do it on a rental burr project, I can usually get my money back and get it financed. without any of my money into it in the long term. So let's say the repair cost on this house is 20 grand. What do you need to buy the property for to make it a deal? 50,000 max, right?
And those repair costs, are you adding in like holding costs and insurance and anything like that, or?
No. So I'm not figuring in all the other stuff. I'm only figuring in just repair costs and that 30%. So you're not making a 30% margin. You're making more like a 15 or 20.
But you are starting to figure in other problems that are not construction problems, like the 10,000 holdback for getting rid of a bad tenant.
Yeah, you probably should.
I mean, you
Yeah.
are starting to, so,
This repair cost could be or improvement
yeah, problem.
or problem solving, problems. It's the R in ARV, so I just go right to repair. It should just be AIV. We can start a new trend after improvement value. Because that's what we're doing. We're improving the property to get it. What I'm doing with the Burr strategy is do you know who the number one person I'm selling the property to is? The appraiser, not the bank. The appraiser is hired by the bank, and that's the guy I'm trying to impress. And that's who I focus on. Then it's the tenants. Then it's my wife. But if you're flipping a property, who do you have to sell it to first?
Buyer.
The appraiser, and then the buyer,
And then your wife.
and then your wife. Because people aren't going to buy something that's too expensive. They just can't, in most cases. This year's been an odd year. This year will probably never happen again for another year or two. But you can't take what happened this year and consider that to be the new normal. Just stick with the basics.
Hey Nick, in
Yeah.
your example, how do you determine, when you're looking at a property, how do you determine it's going to be maybe $20,000 in your example, in improved value? I mean, because you're looking at this property, you got to figure out how much it's going to cost, right?
Yeah. So you got to decide if you're doing the work or if you're going to hire it out. You got to know. I mean, experience really helps. How I figure stuff out is I usually just in my head I think increments of $5,000, just to keep it easy. If I'm doing a kitchen, I think $10,000. If I'm doing flooring, depending on the size of the house, if it's 1,000 square feet, 1,500, I'm thinking 5,000. These days, I probably should add a little bit more. It's been a weird year, but I try to just keep it simple and estimate a little bit high in increments of $5,000 as I walk through the house. When I go through the house, I try to get as many photos as I can so I can go back to it. And then I also still get an inspection report, and I like to take the stuff that they recommend doing, and I like to go through that too and make sure I put it on those extra things that they called out and make sure it's on my repair estimate. I go back to it a few different times. The repair, it's not a one and done. But initially, when I make an offer on a property, I don't necessarily always go to it. I'll look at it online, and I can just kind of look at the photos and get a rough idea. Is this a $25,000 job or a $50,000 job? I do increments of $25,000 when I'm making an offer on a property I haven't seen before. So I think maybe it's 25 based off the size and what needs to be done. If it's a smaller house, cosmetic, not tearing down walls, 25. Smaller house, probably tearing down some walls, could be 50. Medium-sized house, cosmetic, probably 25. Medium-sized house, gut job, probably 75. Larger house, cosmetic, I used to think 50, 65, now it's $100,000. Larger house, gut job, it's going to be 125 or so. So It's more just based off experience, and then when you walk through, then you can find detail a little bit. But until you're opening up walls, you really don't know what you're getting yourself into. And a lot of the time, they'll be truthful with you, and most investors raise your hand if you're like me. You don't know what you spent until months later, after you completed the project. Yeah, Rob. It's hard to figure it all out. You use all kinds of different credit cards and stuff like that, and you're trying to keep track of it, and you're working on other things. And
Did you do an inspection report on the recent house? 'Cause it was kind of a mess
no.
to see it.
I normally, I did. Yeah, I got an inspection. Yeah.
You would have known about that water heater.
Unnecessarily.
Yeah, that inspector wasn't that great. But you get what you pay for. I think it was $150. It was an investor special inspection where they're just looking for real bad stuff. So you can get different types of inspections out there to cater to your needs.
How did you get that?
The water heater wasn't a big thing though. Like it didn't affect the value. It was just there. I just thought it was silly because I assumed it had 2 water heaters, a big house. And I'm like, oh, it's just the one? Okay. The appraiser didn't call me up like, hey, did you know that other water? Like it doesn't actually matter. It's just something that I skipped by. Okay. So different ways you can find a good deal. The MLS still surprisingly has some good deals out there once in a while. They're slim. Real estate agents, before they hit the market, wholesalers, and going directly to the seller. We already talked a lot about funding. You can use conventional loans, hard money, private loans. The difference, private loan is like someone who's not really like an established lender. They're just somebody that has money that you can borrow. You can partner with somebody. You can do seller financing. Anybody confused on seller financing? So that's where let's say the seller owns the property outright. They don't have a loan on it. And sometimes they could still, and you can still do this. But for simplicity, let's say you're going to buy a house for $200,000 from this guy. He's older. He doesn't really need the money. He would like monthly installment payments, though. Maybe you can offer him $210,000, pay him a little bit extra, and you make him payments over the next 20, 30 years, 5 years. It's working directly with the seller, no banks, and you're making payments. But you still own the house. They're signing over the deed. They just have a lien against the property now. And then subject to, anybody not know subject to? So subject to is when you, this is where you're basically taking somebody's mortgage over and making the payments on their behalf without anybody's permission. And the title company will still actually close for you. They just say, it's subject to this mortgage that's in place. And that's why they call it subject to. Because the title is clean, subject to this mortgage that they're like, okay, good luck. I've done it 3 times now. Never had the loan call due because we made the payments. Got to make sure you have a good closing team. So figure out who you're using for title and escrow. We like to use Title I, Next Title. If you're doing real creative deals, Next Title is pretty good. They'll do wholesale assignment fees and stuff like that. Or they'll do subject tos. Title I's just, they have great coffee and they're friendly, but they're not too creative. Sometimes you're going to need an attorney. Or you can even just close without anybody and just do a quick claim. And that's where you go directly to the county and you have a notarized 1-page document that the seller signs off. You don't even need to sign it. You just take it to the title or to the assessor's office and you own the house. So there's different ways that you can close on a property. When it comes to project management, just keep in mind that being cheap will usually get you cheap results. Ask me how I know. Applying for permits in advance of a project closing is typically a good idea. Otherwise, you're sitting there for months paying interest. Tell me how I know. So done this several times while you wait for permits. You could do that in advance without being an owner. You can apply for permits. Try to be friendly, understanding, and very persistent with everybody. The squeaky wheel gets the grease in this business. And designers are worth the money. It pays to stage. If you're a seller, putting it on the MLS with professional photos is a very good idea. Don't overprice it. Don't take an offer on the first day. Ideally, you shouldn't. Let it simmer on the market for a few days, especially if you're in a market like we were 3 months ago. And before you decide to sell a property, I would recommend you have a property manager walk through it, just in case, just to get a good idea what it should rent for at that time. If you're refinancing the property, apply for the loan around the same time that you purchase the property, because it will take months for this loan to go through. You don't want to wait until you're done, because then it's just going to take longer. And be present for the appraisal, because that's who you're selling to. And you're going to want to tell them everything that you did to the property. That way they can take great notes. And on a refinance, they don't know how much money you're asking for unless you're there. And you tell them, I'm kind of hoping this property appraises for $550. That's what I was hoping for. And this is why, because I did all these things. And it makes their job easier, because then they can go take all these notes and they have, oh, you're trying to get $550. Cool, I'll find comps to help you out with that. Typically. It depends on how you treat your appraiser and if you're being realistic or not.
Were you there for the Gleason one?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
That was,
I hope you'd said yeah.
that was my most important day. Really, I'm not kidding. The appraisal is so important on the burrs. It's worth it to be there and tell them everything you did.
You want to make the appraiser's job as easy as possible because they're so busy, and if you can help them justify value, don't do it.
And typically on a refi, they don't care what price they're going to come up with. They pick the easiest comps they can find, they average it, and they send it off, because there's nothing guiding them, like in a regular purchase where there's a purchase price, and they can try to use that as a guide for them. Hey, can I justify this? Can I bracket for them to help this loan go through? Because an appraiser, depending on what comps they pick, they could all be wildly different.
Can you go back there for a second? I have a question on that last one.
Yeah.
Says if you're refinancing, you apply for the loan around the same time you purchase the property.
Yeah.
How do you do that if you're going through a big renovation like that? You're talking about just the process of applying for a loan? You're not actually getting the appraiser there at that point?
Yeah, but you're going to go through the process of getting underwritten and making sure that you can get approved for the property. Because what if you wait until the end, 6 months later, and the property's, you put a tenant in there, and then you find out you're actually not approved for the loan, and it's going to be another year or so, maybe another couple of years. You're not doing your taxes the way you should. Then what do? You already have tenants in the property, and your short-term loan is going to run out. You're going to have to spend a lot of money, in hard money, keeping the loan going until the tenants are out, and then you got to sell it. So it's better to just make sure you qualify while you're doing the renovation, because you may have to sell it. Not everybody always qualifies for a loan, especially when you start having multiples. When you start getting 5 to 7 loans, it's more and more difficult, right?
Yeah, I think it's a change. You just did a loan right now where the guy was an appraiser. He brings in about $40,000 a month. And in September, he forgot to bill the appraisal management company, the AMC, so he showed 0 income in September. That could be a deal breaker. So you need to make sure that you prepare for those things. You have to figure it out. But I mean, things like that you don't even know would be deal breakers, and they can be deal breakers. And that's why exactly what you said. Figure this financing out up front, because it's ultimately going to be subject to the appraisal value anyways. But get all the credit stuff worked out.
It's subject to a lot of things.
Yeah.
Okay, so my best advice for newbies, try to keep your properties as rentals is what I'd recommend. Flipping's great, it's fun, But good God, if I would have kept every property I flipped somehow, I would be a lot wealthier than I am today. Use a great property manager. We talked about that. Start using QuickBooks early in your career. Yeah. Hire a great assistant as a W-2 employee. Thanks, Haley. Get into as much good debt as you possibly can. That I don't know why. That may sound so weird, but I believe that is going to make you wealthy in the long run. Get into as much debt as you possibly can.
That you can pay for.
That you can get somebody else to pay for.
Right. I mean, it's important because then you just lose your equity if you don't.
Yeah. Pay people quickly and pay them well. It's almost 8:30. This next one is quick. So this is on flipping, and then I'll be done. Any other questions about the creative investing rentals?
So Nick, does your team, if somebody hires your team, you can help them do all this analysis and, you know, this is gonna probably be this much to improve. Is that something that you guys do as well, or is that something you don't?
We definitely specialize in that.
Yeah.
It's, we don't necessarily like provide the house. We got to do the best we can to find them the right house. But like, just to be honest, if I find a house that has potentially 200 grand in equity, I'm not going to call up all my clients and be like, who wants free money? Yeah. You know, this is what I do. Yeah. But if it doesn't fit my portfolio, like if I'm too busy, yeah, I'm gonna probably give it to somebody on my team, or they'll give it to one of their clients. So yes, we can absolutely help analyze your deals. We encourage you to go out and try to hit the streets, basically send out mailers, try to find an off-market deal, and then we'll help you from there. Mm-hmm. We'll help you try to put it together. Does that make sense? I don't want to give you the false expectations that we're going to find all these great deals for you that have 30% equity in them. If we did that, why wouldn't we just be buying them? Mm-hmm. But if you can find them, we'll help make sure that they are worth that. We'll do your after repair values for you. We'll help with all the resources that you might need to put it together. But we're not just going to give you free money, if that makes sense.
Well, the seminar's free, so
the seminar's free. Oh, sorry. Yeah. I just don't want to set false expectations that we're going to find these great deals for you. We're going to help you along your journey. You got to do the hard work of finding these great deals. If you want to be a traditional investor, we can help you there. And as you can see, you can still make a lot of money being a traditional investor, putting 25% down. Or just house hack. You know, get a loan, or just go move into a house and then move out of it and put tenants in there instead of selling it. Mm-hmm. We can still do that, by the way, if you don't want your house to go live.
My wife would never get that.
Okay.
So you telling people go find it, where do you come in to make some money on? Are you going to be the other realtor to help them?
So if they're flipping a house, ideally they're using us as their listing agent.
Yeah.
Or they may refer us a deal. They may find something great and they want to partner on it. We do a lot of free work, but it's usually worth it in the long run because we're getting to know people and helping them out. And they usually refer us business. There's a lot of, I have a lot of investor clients that I've never done a deal with, but they've sent us plenty of clients, like friends and family to work with as realtors. Does that make sense? So we're trying to add a little value to your life instead of just opening a door to a house. And be like, you want it? Okay, so this is all about flipping homes, and it's really quick. Let me know if you have any questions. So there's 5 things I feel like you really got to have. We talked about having a really good deal. You've got to buy for 70% of the after repair value minus whatever the repair costs are. These days you have to have a really good contracting team because most of them are busy. You got to have great realtors on your team. There's a few of us that can help you out. You have to have great money sources. And you got to be relentless because there's a lot of roadblocks constantly. There's a lot of things that will always get in your way. Right, Nathan?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A a lot of things to get over.
Yeah.
Once you do, it's totally worth it.
How to find really good deals. This is another slideshow, so sorry it's redundant. You can come to the REI. Sometimes you'll have wholesalers that come here. They're like, hey, I've got a great deal. And all they do is they look for great deals and they wholesale them and they get a fee. That's where a lot of my deals come from. And you can be on the same list as I am with these people. Realtors, MLS, foreclosures, go to motivated sellers directly. You got to run the numbers. We talked about this. The numbers work very similar to a rental. The only difference is there's repair cost involved. And then instead of the holding costs, you have, well, I mean, you have holding costs too. You have selling costs. Selling cost is typically around 7% of whatever the purchase price will be. And you got to buy the property. You can't just be a looky-loo. Make an offer, even if you have nothing else lined up. Add an inspection clause. I usually like to give 2 weeks or 10 business days. Make the offer assignable in case you can't close on it. That way you can assign it to some other investor and maybe get paid. And give yourself 2 to 4 weeks to close. Even if you're working with a hard money lender that says I can close in 5 days, maybe they can, but the title company can't. So give yourself 2 to 4 weeks to close on a deal. During your escrow period, you want to line up the other 4 must-haves if you made an offer and you got something under contract. So on day 1, get an inspection scheduled, apply for permits if you're going to need them, and get a detailed timeline plan going. And then after you close on the property, change the locks, make sure all the utilities are on day 1. Make sure you know where the water shutoff valve is too. And get it done quick and do it right. And that's all I got. Any questions?
Thank you, Nick.
Yeah.
That was good.
Thank you. Pretty basic stuff. Okay.